The Train Station Boy, Dylan Wong's journey from Leshan's platforms to stardom. The train station in Leshan was not a glamorous place. It smelled faintly of iron and dust, with echoes of announcements bouncing off the cracked walls and the steady rhythm of trains arriving and departing forming the heartbeat of the city. But for one boy, the station was more than a hub of travel. For Dylan Wong, long before he became a household name across Asia, the station was a window into another world, a world he longed to reach. The locals who passed him daily would remember him as the quiet boy who often stood at the edge of the platform, eyes fixed on the silver carriages that thundered past. Where others saw ordinary trains, Dylan saw a promise, the chance to escape the small-town routines of Leshan and chase something bigger than himself. He did not know what that something was, but he knew it existed, somewhere far beyond the horizon. This is the story of the Train Station Boy, the early years of Dylan Wong's life, and how the boy from Sichuan province transformed his fascination with leaving into a journey of self-discovery, resilience, and stardom. Dylan Wong was born in December 1998 in Leshan, a picturesque city nestled by the Min River and famous for the grand Buddha statue carved into its cliffs. For most children in Leshan, life was simple: school, family, and the occasional trip to the market. But Dylan was different. Even as a child, he struggled with the boundaries of routine. His parents noticed early on that Dylan had an unusual sense of wonder. He was never content with what was enough. When other children played basketball for fun, Dylan played with the intensity of someone who imagined himself in front of cheering crowds. When classmates practiced singing for a school festival, Dylan sang with the boldness of a performer ready for a stage much larger than the schoolyard. But it was at the train station where this yearning became most visible. Friends teased him for spending so much time there. But Dylan didn't mind. He felt that every whistle, every departure, was telling him that the world was larger than Leshan. The boy who leaned against the station railing wasn't daydreaming idly. He was silently preparing for a life beyond. To Dylan, the trains were metaphors. Each carriage symbolized possibility. Each destination announced over the loudspeakers was a reminder that somewhere out there, people lived completely different lives. He often imagined who was sitting inside compartments: businessmen rushing to Chengdu, families visiting relatives in Beijing, students heading to universities in Shanghai. I used to watch the trains and wonder what it would feel like to just get on without telling anyone. Dylan would later confess in an interview, "I thought maybe if I could leave, I could find out who I was supposed to become." In this way, the trains became his personal compass. They taught him that movement meant growth, that life was not meant to stand still. The boy who once felt trapped in a small town learned to see trains as reminders that escape was not just possible. It was inevitable if he had the courage to board. But dreaming of leaving and actually leaving are two very different things. For Dylan, reality often clashed with imagination. His parents, like many in smaller Chinese cities, expected him to pursue a stable career. They encouraged him to study hard, perhaps take a practical path like becoming a teacher or working in administration. Dylan, however, found himself caught between expectations and yearning. He entered the Sichuan Southwest College of Civil Aviation to train as a flight attendant. Ironically, a career that revolved around travel, but not in the way he had once dreamed. The boy who used to watch trains leave Leshan was now preparing to guide passengers onto airplanes. It might have been enough for someone else, but not for Dylan. Even in the aviation program, he found himself restless. He enjoyed the discipline, the precision, the opportunity to meet new people. But he knew deep down he wanted more. He was not meant to be a nameless face in uniform. His heart demanded a stage, a story, a role where he could truly express the restless energy that had carried him from the train platforms of his childhood. His leap of faith came in the form of a talent contest. Friends encouraged him to participate, reminding him of the charisma he had always carried since childhood. Dylan hesitated at first, fearing rejection, but eventually decided to risk it. Stepping onto that stage was like boarding his first train, terrifying, uncertain, but thrilling. The contest did not immediately crown him a star, but it opened a door. Casting directors noticed his tall frame, sharp features, and undeniable charm. He began auditioning, stumbling at first but learning with each rejection. Every failed audition was like watching a train leave without him, but he refused to stop returning to the station. He knew his train would come. That train arrived in 2018, when Dylan was cast as Dao Ming-si in the reboot of Meteor Garden. Overnight, the boy who once stood alone at Leshan Station became one of Asia's most recognizable young actors. Fans across the continent adored him, swooning over his portrayal of the arrogant yet vulnerable leader of the F4. Success was a whirlwind, but Dylan never forgot the station. In interviews, he often spoke about how leaving home shaped him. The image of trains became a recurring theme in his personal reflections. Stardom, he realized, was like riding a high-speed train, thrilling but relentless. Stops were few, and the journey often blurred. Yet, unlike many who found fame overwhelming, Dylan carried with him the lessons of the boy at the platform. He remembered that longing was not weakness, it was fuel. That restlessness was not a curse, it was direction. His career choices reflected this mindset as he began experimenting with roles in dramas like Evernight 2 and Mr. Dragon, eager to prove he was more than a one-hit wonder. But every departure has a price. For Dylan, the biggest challenge was a sense of disconnection from his roots. Stardom demanded relocation, long shoots away from family, and the endless expectations of fans and the media. There were nights, he admitted, when he missed the quiet comfort of Leshan, the simplicity of watching trains without the world watching him. Fame, after all, does not erase loneliness. The boy who once longed to leave found himself at times longing to return. Still, Dylan understood that longing was part of the journey. Just as trains always arrive and depart, so too do the stages of life. The platform was never meant to be permanent. Today, Dylan Wong is more than just an actor. He is a symbol for dreamers in small towns everywhere. His journey proves that the longing to leave, the restlessness that so many feel, can lead to something extraordinary if nurtured with courage and persistence. He once said, "When I look back, I realized the boy at the station was already on his journey." Even though he didn't know it, every time he imagined leaving, he was preparing himself for the moment he finally did. For fans, the story of the train station boy is not just about Dylan. It is about themselves. It is about anyone who has ever stared out a window, watched the world move, and wondered if they, too, could be part of something bigger. Years after his breakout, Dylan returned quietly to Leshan. He was no longer the anonymous boy at the station. He was a star. The trains always came on time in Leshan. Their arrival was a thunderous reminder of movement in a town that otherwise seemed frozen in routine. For Dylan, still a boy in oversized hand-me-downs, the sight of those sleek silver carriages was nothing short of magic. While most of his classmates dashed home after school, Dylan often lingered, wandering toward the station where the world seemed to pass by without stopping. He would perch on a low wall near the tracks, his school bag sliding off one shoulder, his eyes locked on the trains as though they were messengers carrying secrets he longed to hear. On summer afternoons, when the sun scorched the tiled rooftops and cicadas hummed from every tree, Dylan would close his eyes as a train roared past. The rush of wind tangled his hair and rattled his shirt buttons. To him, it was no longer a train. It was a dragon in flight, a promise of escape, a vehicle carrying him toward a world far beyond Leshan's narrow streets. Sometimes he played a game. He would imagine himself sitting inside the compartments, peeking through the windows at landscapes rushing by. He was a student in Shanghai, a singer in Beijing, a dreamer in Hong Kong. The train became his stage, and he the lead actor in countless invisible plays that only he could see. To other children, it might have been foolish fantasy. To Dylan, it was survival. The trains gave him hope that his small-town existence was not the sum of his life. At home, Dylan's parents loved him fiercely, but lived by practical rules. His father was a man of steady hands and steady routines, who believed stability was the highest achievement a person could aim for. His mother, gentle but cautious, often reminded Dylan to keep your head down and study hard. They did not fully understand his restlessness. To them, their son's long hours at the train station seemed like a strange quirk. "You'll catch a cold there," his mother would scold, tugging at his sleeve when he came home late. But Dylan rarely explained. How could he? How could he describe the ache in his chest when he watched people board trains bound for places he couldn't even imagine? There was love in his home, yes, but not the kind that encouraged wandering. The Wong household valued predictability, while Dylan craved the unknown. One winter evening stands out in Dylan's memory. He was 10 years old, the sky a canvas of gray, and he followed his father to the station to collect a relative returning from Chengdu. The train pulled in, its wheels screeching against the rails. Steam rose into the cold air, and passengers spilled on the platform, their coats dusted with frost. Dylan's eyes widened, not at the family member they were waiting for, but at the travelers themselves. He saw a woman clutching a guitar case, a man holding books in a foreign language, children dragging rolling suitcases that squeaked over the pavement. Each person seemed touched by something greater than Les Han. Each person carried a story from far away. That night, Dylan could hardly sleep. He lay awake, whispering to himself, "One day, I'll be the one stepping off that train. One day, I'll leave and come back with my own stories." At school, Dylan's imagination set him apart. Teachers noticed his talent for storytelling during essays, where he often wrote about trains that could fly into the clouds or tracks that stretched into the stars. His classmates laughed, calling him the dreamer, but he wore the title with quiet pride. Basketball became his second escape. On the court, the rhythm of his feet echoed the rhythm of trains. The bounce of the ball was like the clatter of wheels on tracks, fast, unstoppable, pulsing with energy. Whenever he scored, he imagined the roar of the crowd as the cheer of a departing train, carrying him further away from small-town expectations. But still, whenever practice ended, Dylan's feet carried him back to the station, where his truest dreams lived. One afternoon, while Dylan sat at his usual spot, a stranger noticed him. An elderly man with a weathered face, dressed in a traveler's coat, paused beside the boy. "You're here often," the man remarked. His voice was calm, but his eyes twinkled with curiosity. Dylan nodded. "I like watching the trains." "Why?" the man asked, leaning on his walking stick. "Because they're going somewhere," Dylan answered simply. The man chuckled. "And you? Where do you want to go?" Dylan hesitated. Then, with all the sincerity of a boy who hadn't yet learned to doubt himself, he said, "Everywhere." The old man smiled knowingly. "Then don't just watch. One day, buy yourself a ticket." That brief exchange lingered in Dylan's memory for years. It was the first time someone outside his family validated his longing. The stranger at the station became part of his legend, a symbolic conductor nudging him toward his future. By his teenage years, the ache to leave had grown sharper. Friends began mapping their lives: university in Chengdu, apprenticeships in local shops, marriages arranged by family expectations. Dylan, meanwhile, felt like he was standing on a platform while everyone else was already boarding. Sometimes he resented Les Han. The streets felt too narrow, the conversations too repetitive, the opportunities too few. And yet, he also loved his hometown, the spicy aroma of street food, the reflection of the Les Han boot in the river, the laughter of children running through alleys. He loved it, but he could not stay. The conflict tore at him, a loyalty to home versus the hunger for more. But every whistle of a departing train reminded him which voice would ultimately win. It wasn't only about leaving. It was about becoming. Watching strangers step onto trains, Dylan often wondered what kind of man he would be once he left Les Han. A singer? An athlete? A storyteller? In private, he rehearsed. Standing in front of the bathroom mirror, he mimicked the confident posture of travelers he had seen. He practiced smiles, expressions, even imagined conversations in places he'd never been. Without realizing it, Dylan was training himself as a performer, an actor in waiting. The boy at the train station wasn't just dreaming of escape. He was shaping himself into the kind of person who could step into any role, any destination, any life. Years later, as fame engulfed him, Dylan would look back and see the station not just as a backdrop, but as a teacher. It taught him patience, imagination, and the courage to long for something bigger. The boy who once sat silently on the edge of a platform, watching trains disappear into the distance, had unknowingly rehearsed for the biggest departure of his life, leaving Les Han behind to become Dylan Wong, the star. But no matter how far he traveled, the echo of those childhood platforms remained, because inside every